Hi, welcome to our Clojure series, part 2. I'm very happy to be here again, and I'm looking forward to enhance our little web application together again. So, what did we do last time? Last time we set up a Clojure project. We created a web application with Ring. We set it up, and we added Composure to create some routes, to create a route for, let's see, one for the default web route, which just returned hello world, and one for the friends page, which returns a small uplifting message to our friends. So what will we do this time? Currently, we can see that our application hosts some kind of web application. We are getting HTML, but it's not really what you would call a web server, because a lot of things are missing there. We have no session handling, we can't set cookies yet, we don't have some HTTP security measures, which we want to have later. And so the first thing is that we will enhance our Ring application to be a little more strict and a little more like a browser would expect a web application to behave. So what do we need for that? We are really lucky that Ring as a HTTP server is very, very much enhanceable. You can install some kind of plugin system. It's called middlewares. And these middlewares act like a chain, or like a filter chain, a command chain. So you register them in a certain order, and the HTTP request just goes through all of them in this order, and maybe one middleware enhances it, or one middleware does validation on it. And so every HTTP request to our application will be sent through all of those middlewares. And there is a lot of middlewares out there, a lot of really helpful middlewares. And luckily, one project, one library went ahead and just packed together the most sensible and the most used middlewares. And this is the library Ring Defaults. So first we will add, obviously, again, a new dependency to our project file. So now we have the dependency Ring Defaults in 0.3.2. And now we want to include this into our namespace as well. And hopefully this time I won't make a typo, which takes 5 minutes to find. So first we refer all. We just want to toy around with it a little bit and want to see how everything works. So let's just try and build the application so we know this again. Let's run it. I'm using too many tools currently, so I confuse some of the commands with others. So our web application still starts. Everything looks fine. No problem with the new dependency. Works as expected. Now we enhance everything. So let me see. Last time we had our Jetty application, our Jetty web server, which is used by Ring, and we provided a handler to it. So we have the road handler by Clojure, and every web request will be passed into that handler. And now we want to wrap that handler with the default web stack. And for this, we have the wrap defaults function from the Ring defaults. And we wrap this handler with the site defaults. What does this contain? So first, there are several different default library. There are default settings for APIs and for sites. Here we use the site defaults. So this prepares our web server for every necessary technology to host a website. The API defaults just differ a little bit. Because if you are hosting a HTTP API, you have different requirements than if you're hosting a web page. There are also the API defaults, the secure API defaults and the secure site defaults, which will add transport layer security, HTTPS to the stack. But we don't want to use that here because if we host that application later, we will not expose the application directly to the internet, but we will set up a proxy before that. So the proxy will communicate with the clients via HTTPS, but the proxy doesn't necessarily need to communicate with the application with HTTPS. So the site defaults are currently enough for us. Okay. It is, as every time, if you have questions about what is happening here, if I'm too fast, too slow, just type into the chat. And now we will run the application again. And this time, let me add the browser to the screen. The application is starting, that's a good sign. I want to add Safari. And make it a little smaller. Just a little bit longer. So, and now we're adding the application. And we see, as we left the last time, we see the Hello World headline because we are accessing the root. And if we check the developer tools, here it is, sorry. And then we see that it doesn't really matter what we did here. Great. So I would have expected to see a cookie and HTTP headers, which is not what happened here. Okay, cache as always. So what are we seeing here? We see that a cookie with a ring session was added to the request. So beforehand, we just were sent this string, this HTML string to the browser and that was it. And now we have a cookie, we have accept headers, we have accepting coding, and now I need to let's further up. And here we have a no-sniff header, we have proper content type, we have XSS protection in there, and this is all just because we added that one function to our stack. So we have added our first Ring middleware, which is nice. And it works as I would have expected. Okay. What else can we add? We have a cookie now, we have a session, but currently there's one thing that's really bothering me in the application. Let's close the terminal for a while. And this is this little thing. We have defined port 80 as a default. And if you ever installed an application in some kind of environment, you will know that port 80 is blocked most of the time. So something else is running there, or some cloud providers don't let you choose your own port, and you have to rely on external configuration to define which port your application should run on. There are basic ways to pass in parameters into the application. I mean, it's just very visible here. We have args. We can pass the port as an argument into that the application. But usually I like to have something more sophisticated. If you have worked with, for example, Spring or with Eclipse Microprofile, they have really clever configuration mechanisms in the Java world, where you can have a config file in the application. You can have parameters in the as a command line parameter starting the application. You can have parameters as system environment variables, and they are stacked. So the most important one is the environment variable. The command line variable. Then if there is no command line variable, the application looks for the environment variable. And if there's also none, it checks the configuration files. And this is really helpful because we can create a properties file with default settings. And when it deployed to a different environment, we can just override them, either with environment variables or with command line properties. And when I'm telling you this, it's pretty clear that something like this already exists for Clojure 2. And just let me search for the dependency again. Okay, this is the config library by Yoctos. And this basically does everything I just talked about. We have a config file, which is in EDN format, which is nice. It's no YAML or properties or whatever. We have different environment variables for lining or boot. We can pass environment variables or Java system properties. The library is also on Clojures, so we copy that over. All right, it's in there. And then we configure it. And this is rather easy. We head back into our main namespace. We can change this back. By the way, we don't want to refer all. Currently, we just use grep defaults and site defaults. We don't need other stuff in the namespace. Okay, now we use the config library and refer to the function env. Now we can use that where we configure our port. So we would like to get the value port from our environment. So we figure out if we have some environment configuration, we will have a keyword port, which helps us find the port we want to map. For this, we need to create a resource file. This goes by configuration. You can see it at the bottom. It's the file config.edn in the resources folder. And this is the whole content. We will add more and more configuration afterwards. Don't worry about that. But for now, this is everything we need. And let's bring up the terminal. I am hoping this will work again. Beginner's mistake. It's not called environment. It's called env. We save that, head back to the terminal. Persistent array map cannot be cast to number. Okay. This should be that simple. I'm not sure what I did wrong this time. Yes, of course. We want to retrieve the value with the keyword here. So it's not a map, of course, it's a function call. It's working. Let's check in Safari. Everything works under port 80. Now, let's try and change it. Maybe it didn't work. Maybe the configuration didn't work and the application just picks up port 80 as default HTTP port. Who knows? Let's go back to the config and do port 84. And let's run it again. Application is started. Port 80, no connection. Port 81. 84. Our application is where we expected. Okay. Now we wouldn't need the application if, let's just quickly change that back to 80. We wouldn't need the config library if this is all that we wanted to do, right? So I'm switching to the core namespace again. And yeah, now 80 was hard-coded here earlier, and now it's fetched from a different file. We have one nothing so far. Nice comment from Sniffin. I think in some systems you can define port 0, then the OS will allocate your port, which is returned to you. Would be cool to check that in config. That's nice, we can do that. And we can do this with the terminal. I did not know that fact, so that's a cool thing. Thanks for that hint. So, and other comment, CRJ Condo would be really helpful here. Yes, we should configure that in the next session. I'm also very fond of it, and it would prevent my many typos I make. That's right. So we create a jar from our application. In this jar, all the configs are also included. So if the jar will be started with java-jar, the application should start on port 80. Let's go to the target. The application is started from the jar, and we see here that I forgot to save. So it is started under port 84. Let's check back on this really quick. That's right, it's here. We can reload the page, everything is here. And but now we want to check the hypothesis that port 0 will result in a randomly assigned port. So we will add a command line parameter. And we will start it again. of 49,479. Let's check that again. One. And here it is. That's a good one. Thanks. I did not know about this behavior. That's really nice. And also the last thing to check, we will deploy our application to Heroku later. And for Heroku, it is the environment provides a port to you in the environment variable port. So the environment of our app will look like this. We have a variable port, and we assign, now let's assign 80 again. And when we start the application again with 0 command line parameters, oh, sorry, the terminal was not visible. So we exported the value 80 to the variable port. And when we start the application now, I would assume that it starts on port 80, which it again did. So again, the last unnecessary check. Application runs under port 80. This doesn't really look like much now because we are used to configuring our applications like this, right? So as I said, if you are working in Java, if you're working with Spring, you already know that this is a mechanism you need, and this is a mechanism that works. But it's really cool and helpful that there's just a small library that does all this with as much effort as this here. We refer the env in our namespace, and we can look up the keys from that. And it's also really cool that we can configure everything in EDN. So we don't have that horrible YAML business where every white space can ruin your whole config. So we had in our project, we have, I'm currently on a Spring Boot project, and there was one white space error in the YAML, and the application just terminated with error code 1 during startup with no debug logs. And yeah, of course, it was because of a white space. And EDN is much more friendly here. And if we are working on Clojure, yeah, then I think there's a consensus here that EDN is a nice format. And we will add many different things here later. We will add database configuration. We will add some other external configuration. We will add configuration for including Google as an OAuth provider, where at the endpoints we can configure the endpoints from the Google OAuth manager separately here and pass in the secrets via secret management or via environment variable. This is all really helpful, and yeah, it's just a small library which is very stable and which does this for us, because this is something I like about Clojure. There's no such things as frameworks which bring everything. You just have libraries and you use what you need and what you want. And it usually works really, really well. Okay, we have 2 minutes left on the clock, but it does not make sense to start anything new. So thank you for watching. I hope you learned something. I learned something with the ports. Thank you for that. And see each other next week. Thank you.